Great. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our Right to Bear Arms Israel versus the US webinar. I'm Nitzan. I am a team leader for Lola Israel Tel Aviv chapter. I'm also a criminal attorney and a former prosecutor and former investigator in the Israeli Police Central Unit of Tel Aviv. We're going to do introductions first, and then we're just going to get into it. So, Kerry, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me again. I appreciate it all the way over here. I'm on the East Coast in the United States in a very gun-friendly state, Georgia, down in the South. And I run a nonprofit organization that is called We the Female. And in short, essentially our goal is to arm the women with education, confidence, and self-defense. We have a holistic approach to self-defense that includes the most important self-defense tool available to women, and that is firearms.
And we also have with us Maureen, which is going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm muted because in the background there are voices of kids screaming. They don't want to go to bed. I'm Maureen. I'm a public policy researcher, also political advisor, and I'm the spokeswoman of Armed Women of Israel, which is a group that provides weapon training for women in Israel and self-defense.
Okay, so Lola, as we all know, stands from Lady of Liberty Alliance and is also a nonprofit that promotes the ideas of libertarianism, liberalism amongst women all around the world. And the first thing I would like to do is do a short overview of the situation in Israel, because I think it is rather unique. And then also Maureen can jump in, and then we'll talk about the US. So in Israel, we have, on the one hand, a society where most people have in their lifetime used a firearm, because we do have the mandatory enlistment for both men and women. Most schools have these programs where you go on when you're 16 to try out for the military, and most of us have this experience. But that aside, most people are not allowed to own or carry, and we're also going to talk a bit about owning versus carrying. Most people aren't actually allowed to own a firearm or carry a firearm because there's many criteria, which some people think don't make a lot of sense. Some of them are in regards to what you did in your military service or other kinds of service, but some of them are just different. For example, like I do own a firearm because I'm an officer in the military. I was also a combat soldier, but I wasn't a combat soldier long enough to qualify. But because I am an officer, then I do qualify. Like, it doesn't matter, like if you're an officer or if you're above a certain rank, sergeant first class, then you can own, no matter what your position was or what your military profession is. Also, if you're a certain kind of combat soldier, mostly infantry, have a certain type of combat training, you can own a firearm. And also, if you were another type of combat soldier with a different type of training, but you did it for at least 2 years in a specific era, then you can also qualify. Other qualifications, where you live, certain neighborhoods, for example, in Jerusalem, not the entirety of Jerusalem, but certain neighborhoods are considered dangerous enough for you to own a firearm. Some places around the state, some do not. Also, certain professions, if you have a high-risk profession, like archaeologists can qualify, some do not. I used to work with them. No, well, she's shaking her head. The expert is shaking her head at me, so maybe maybe I'm wrong about that. I used to know it, but anyway, the criteria it differs, and after you do meet the criteria, then you have to go through a mandatory training, which is very, very minimal. It's very minimal. And also, after that, you only get to own one. You can pick one gun. It cannot be a rifle. It has to be a certain type of handgun, it's registered to your name. Like you have the certificate that says you can own this gun. This person is qualified to own this gun. You have to keep it safe. Nobody else, no other family members, even if they also are qualified, you're not allowed to switch like a husband and a wife. It's very, very restricting. For example, me in my last tour, it was funny because I was also at the police force at the time, and I also had to do military reserves because of this war. So I actually got to have 3 simultaneously because I had my private gun, my service weapon, and then I had my police issued gun. And it was funny because a lot of people can't even get to that point. It's not allowed. So Maureen, anything to add? You want to?
Yeah, I'm just going to give a background to what has happened here. The 90s in Israel marked a pivotal decade for Israeli citizens regarding their gun rights. Prior to the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, gun ownership in Israel was relatively accessible, providing individuals that had no medical conditions or criminal history in certain criteria. There's a misconception that there were no criteria before 1995 at all, but they weren't published to the public, and they were quite extensive. So since that time, significant efforts have been made to severely restrict the ability of citizens to obtain firearms for self-defense. And there are 3 key groups in Israel that have driven this movement. We have the social activists, including radical feminists and organizations such as they're called Israel Women's Network and Gun-Free Kitchen Tables. They're very strong. They lead the discussion, they lead the discourse. I've been to committees in the Israeli parliament, which is called the Knesset, that decisions were made about gun policy, and these women weren't in the room. The legal advisors started to say, like, to really argue with us. They're not here to defend the other side. And we're like, so what? They're not public representatives. We have the bureaucrats who have limited politicians' attempt to modify the criteria for gun ownership. You have to understand, Israel's bureaucracy is like the British bureaucracy. It's not like in the US. They stay here for a long time, very permanent. And when you put the right person for the social activists, they will block politicians. And we have the mainstream media, which often perpetuates narratives against private or personal gun ownership. People here are scared of guns, and this is very ironic. In Israel, they're scared of legal weapons, even though when you reach 18, like Nitzan mentioned, each one of us gets a training with long arms. They're really scared. And when you talk to them, you understand that they've been brainwashed. This brainwash was a huge problem during October 7th. I hope you are aware. I'm just that lots of citizens who lived in the Gaza envelope, they lived next to their enemies, several kilometers from our enemies. They did not own personal guns. They trusted the state, the country. They trusted the military. They trusted the army. They trusted the police. And they did not own personal guns. And it was a huge problem during the attack of October 7th, the massacre. And in Israel, despite those frequent terror attacks, October 7th was not an exception to former years. We always had like a rise and low in terror attacks. But gun ownership is considered a privilege here rather than a fundamental right. And while the right to life, body, and dignity is ensuring in the basic law that we have. We don't have a constitution, but we do have basic laws, and we have human dignity and liberty. The legal framework right now severely restricts gun ownership. And at the time of October 7th, only about 3% of Israeli citizens were eligible to carry firearms. Eligible doesn't mean they all carried. That's a huge problem in Israel. Even though you are eligible, you don't get the gun so fast. People here are so scared of it. And I will just make it make a long story short. I am now trying to change that. As a woman, it's easier for me to argue. I've heard women tell me during discussions that women don't have the instincts to draw a gun, so we can't give them guns or pistols. One very famous politician, former politician from the left wing, she told me to my face, in 2025, I don't want women to carry guns. That's not what a feminist is to me. And we are trying now to, yeah, it's really hard here. The feminists are not really feminists. That's a problem. We try to create a comprehensive examination of the global gun policies, and we try to highlight how excessive gun restrictions are often associated with authoritarian regimes. You need to explain that. People in Israel tell me, oh, we're scared for the democracy. I'm like, the opposite. Democracies allow guns. Okay, when they take the guns from you, then you're in problem. Then you're in North Korea or Eritrea. Okay, it's really
monitoring. A crazy bot monitoring position or something, because they had to kick everybody out. But it will just resume the recording and then we'll edit it together. Well, someone more technological than me will, I'm sure.
If it happens again, change the password and change the link and see. I put it on X just so people could join and listen, and that might be it. I can delete it if you want, or it could just be that it could be on Instagram too, because I've shared it on Instagram, or any of you. I guess we really won't know where it came from, but
yeah, it could be anyone. Some people just target anything with the name Israel on it, so it's really mostly just stupid bots.
That's because people are dumb.
Yeah, that is why.
Well, I would say something else, but I don't want you guys to get in trouble. I would. Okay, so is she is she coming back to talk about some of the stuff that she's discussing?
I think she is. Okay. I see an iPad. You can begin. So just give us an overview of the situation in the US. I think we're probably more familiar with you guys than you are with us, but we'll still like to hear.
Sure. Well, I've been pretty good about trying to keep up. It's hard to keep up with all of the countries. You know, in the United States, having 50 separate states. So for those of us that do advocacy, not only do we have to keep up with federal laws, we have to keep up with individual state laws, and particularly for somebody like me who travels the country teaching. I have to, and then I try to keep up on global stuff too, but it's a little harder. I did make an effort to educate myself, obviously, after October 7th, understood some of the things you were saying about how people can quote unquote own, and I use that term loosely, own a gun, but they have to keep it locked up and go to the ranges and train and things like that. And how I think there was one, and y'all will remember the story obviously better than me because it was home for you. The young woman who was active duty, and she was able to get to her, what do you call it? Not a city or a town or a village. What's it? There was an, I apologize.
Kibbutz.
Yes. And she was able to access the weapons and distribute them, and people were more, likely to survive. Obviously, I don't need to tell y'all that, an armed society is the way to, to deter these things. But one of the things that really got me, that I take a lot of controversy for in the United States, being the Second Amendment, ironically here, none of our rights should be politically driven, yet we see that here in the United States that they are as well. Obviously not just, that's a global issue, I think, especially for women. And so from the far right here, the far right conservative side here in the United States, I take a lot of heat because I am absolutely what I call a real feminist. I'm not a far left extremist feminist. But I absolutely believe that, we should continue to make sure that we support equal rights for women. And one of those rights being absolutely the ability to defend ourselves, because there is no better tool for a woman. Unless you have practiced hand-to-hand combatives and you're a weightlifter your entire life. And even then, the chances you're still disproportionately matched to a man. The best self-defense tool is, talking about just one-on-one crime is a firearm for women. Now, all of that being said, I was thinking, I'm having my husband, who's my researcher, he's actually my research guy. He's pulling out some data and some information to share with y'all in a minute. So as soon as I get it all, I'll be able to share it with you. Get my reading glasses out for my old lady eyes. But it's one of the biggest ways that gun control gun control research is funded is by left-wing, very wealthy people here in the United States. If you've heard of Bloomberg, he was a mayor, very anti-gun. He got into the political side and worked that through, and he heavily funds a lot of these organizations that do gun research. And gun violence research. First and foremost, for all of you watching, here's your take. There is no such thing as gun violence. There is violence that is committed with a gun, but violence can be committed with any weapon. I'm an abuse survivor, and my ex-husband almost killed me with his hands. But I don't see people calling for, fist control or, any of these types of things. You don't hear people calling in England, right? After the knives, they changed the type of knives that they had. They didn't, for carrying or whatever, they don't have knife control laws. Well, they do, but anyway, you get the idea. So I would be curious to know how much, after, if y'all are paying attention, I'm sure you are, because this is hot news, and I can't imagine that it's not globally, that Elon Musk has come in and has completely exposed a lot of the extravagant spending that the United States has been doing in just the most obscure, bizarre things, all like Sesame Street in Iran, just goofy stuff, right? And that's not even the weirdest. I think there was like pottery classes in some South American country. But I would be
And
real
condoms to Gaza. I think that was like
yeah.
$50 million, I think was.
For pottery classes in Gaza?
Condoms.
No, condoms.
Oh, condoms.
Condoms.
Yeah,
It was all over
that's
the
just
news here.
that's
The
so
US.
absurd. Just silly. So, but I would be curious, that being said, I would be curious if Elon keeps digging, that if he actually finds some connection to these people funding this anti-gun narrative and perpetuating all of that fear over there in Israel too. I think that, for it to be so for firearms to be so widespread feared there among the civilians, ironically, like you said, considering that you all have compulsory military training and y'all actually allow women to have combat roles with guns there, which is the United States. Like, women are some of the best snipers in the world, and y'all get it. Like, we don't here in the United States, which is just bizarre to me in a whole different conversation. But the fact that these people know how to operate a gun, they go in with fundamental safety. They understand that it's an inanimate object. And so to still have that fear is just wild to me. And so I'd be really curious to see what international groups, and particularly those from the United States, that might be funding, because the United States and Israel have such a close relationship. I would be curious to see how much of that is being funded through anti-gun politicians and organizations here in the United States to continue to perpetuate that fear.
I just want to mention that I do not know about American fund. I will actually try to. I'm a researcher. I do my own research. I'll try to look like, but I do know that European funding, and they don't even hide it. European funding goes like there's this coalition of 15 leftist groups that are being funded by the Rosa Luxemburg fund. Do you know about it? It's in Germany, they have a government fund. Each party has its own fund. And the Rosa Luxemburg is a fund that is under the leftist party in Germany, and they give money to NGOs here that work actually against gun that promote gun restrictions in Israel. For sure, it's in their on their website. They don't even hide it. But I will actually try to also.
Now, why would Europeans want a country full of Jews disarmed?
There's also one specific on the topic of protecting women. There's one specific NGO here that actually advocates against guns, but they call themselves the gun on the kitchen table. And the thing is, they claim that a lot of murders committed in Israel were committed by weapons, by firearms, but that's not the truth. Mostly they're committed by knives and by fists and sometimes kitchen
illegal
appliances.
No, it's not
but
true. It's
also
not true. Nitzan, this year there has been a change, but it's illegal weapon.
Yeah, and that was my second point. And when it is weapons, it's usually illegal weapons.
No, you have to. I know you're being sarcastic about there's no such thing as illegal, I think, but it actually
No, I know.
No, she was like,
no, that they're like, because everything can be illegal,
like unregistered, like they got them from
But we need to explain that in Israel, it's not Jewish people that own the illegal. We have a problem. We have.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Huge criminal organizations and terror organizations inside our country. They own about, I think, around today, like 600,000 weapons, like weapons, all kinds of weapons. They get them from our enemies. It's really easy for them to move it across the border. And
also vice versa, though. I mean, we do have a problem of some criminal crime families that actually operate stealing weapons and then reselling them for crime purposes, sometimes even terror purposes. They just work with anyone. But the major thing is that, like, you had another NGO for women who wanted to protect women, named after a murdered woman, and they did this project where they would match up women who were being threatened by their exes or with dogs, with attack dogs. They had this whole project. It was all over. They had a lot of media covering it, and they said, yeah, we want the women to feel safe, so we're getting her an attack dog, which is way more difficult to manage, to control. But they would never say.
Millions going to. We check the numbers. They're like 6 dogs every year they train. Like, that's it. They
would never come out and say we should just let women who are threatened. And you have a criteria that if a police official recommends you personally to own a gun, then you can. But they would never use this loophole to actually help women, because that would make them look bad, and they wouldn't want to do that. But I think if someone is actually being threatened, then it makes sense that maybe there should make an exception for him to own a firearm instead of going for something way more complicated, like getting attack dogs. And that's a bit of a problem, that they refuse to see it as it is, that weapons can also be used to defend people more than they can be used to attack people. And that if someone wants to attack you, they're going to do it by any means, especially if, as you said, it's a man versus a woman. They tend to be bigger and stronger. So, yeah, and this is part of that.
But it's interesting. I'm going to make the list of these organizations, and I will try to check connections to certain organizations in the US. And if I'll find something, I'll let you know.
Please do, because it wouldn't surprise me at all. So for those that are listening and for recording purposes later, to cut this for an edit, for a good caption on this, because I found this interesting, and I know as a researcher, you probably already know this, and for people that don't, when she was talking about the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, and you guys will have to excuse me because I'm old, I can't say anything without glasses. So the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, named in recognition of Rosa Luxemburg and occasionally referred to as Rosa Lux, is a transitional alternative policy lobby group and educational institution. I always have to, because that's subjective, right? But here's what's interesting. Educational institution centered in Germany and affiliated with the Democratic Socialist Left Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, we knew
Yeah.
that.
And,
Yes.
and this
Israeli
money,
ladies.
yeah.
Hello, Jewish ladies. You're letting
No,
Democratic Socialist Germans fund gun control for you? There's a lesson here.
So I'm doing everything I can to fight it right now, and I
Yeah.
actually managed to create a new criteria that is now they're gonna vote on it in a couple of days or weeks.
Mhm.
That is for women who served in certain positions in the army in order to arm more women. I'm not letting them do anything. Trust me, I'm on it. It's hard for me. I know what you're saying. It's hard.
Yeah.
And thank God the next elections in Germany, probably this party won't get elected or something. They're going to lose lots of votes. So this fund won't exist, but it's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild to me. And so I've got some data. I can send it over to you later. I used to work for one of the world's preeminent gun crime, all crime, but particularly related to guns, researchers in the world. So I've spoken Brazil and Ecuador. I'm welcome to come to Israel and speak on this as well. So I mean, I'm happy to do that and come over and talk to women from a, that American perspective. I do it in other states. Brazil, obviously seeing a big to do with this, right? Because they had the anti-gun, right? And then they had, then their leadership changed, and then all of a sudden that was, and immediately day one he gave them back guns, and then Maduro took them away again. But I'll send you the data on this. It's crimeresearch.org. Now, as a researcher, I want to make sure I'm saying your name right. Keznia? Am I saying it right? Keznia?
Kenya? No, but you were talking to Maureen.
Oh, Maureen. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Maureen.
If you're a researcher, that website is a nightmare to deal with. So,
Okay.
but I'll try to send you a direct link. He's great at research, not so much at tech. But essentially, he did research about mass shootings and gun ownership and gun violence across the world. And in short, this is super abridged version of what that research is. But every single country in the world with gun control, every single one of them, has never seen a reduction in mass shootings, regardless of what the gun control laws are.
Mm-hmm.
Any country, even isolated island countries where they have more ability to control what's coming in and out of their country, you would think that by some chance or random that there would be some data from some country showing that gun control is effective, and it's not. Literally in any country in the world. Like I said, that's a super overview of the research, so you can dig into it a little bit more and see what exactly he's talking about, because he studied every country.
Now, actually, that's something that is really hard for me when I speak to Israelis, and I'm talking about like less gun control. They immediately go to the US as like, we don't want to be like the US.
So the US's numbers are actually skewed. FBI data is actually skewed. And one great example of that is succinct, Maureen, that you can probably use for this is, and you can find this on his crime prevention. I'll try to find that link for you as well. This made international news when he talked about this, but the FBI, so there was a lot of, FBI is actually manipulating the data on gun violence by not reporting certain crimes or underreporting certain things or overreporting certain things. And the truth is that you're never actually going to get a solid number, because FBI data is solely based on what local, county, and state municipalities actually report to the FBI, right? So to really get a good solid number of what that really truly looks like is you would have to go to every city.
And what's the definition of gun violence? So it can be like someone who yelled in the street and he had a gun and he
and so that exactly, and that goes to the study in particular that he revealed when he talked about, again, I'm trying to keep this for brevity's sake, trying to keep it short, but essentially the FBI sorely underreported how many crimes, how many mass shootings or gun crimes were stopped by armed individuals. And they're saying that it was down in like the 20-30%, and it was actually just shy of 50%. And that's what we know of. So and most of that data doesn't actually get reported to the FBI. So if you were to look, you could probably find up to 70% of crimes that were going to be committed with a gun in America were actually stopped by another individual that was armed. And it was a huge expose on the FBI, huge black eye to them. It made like I said, it made international news here in the United States when all of that information came out.
Would love the link. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get you all the links and stuff to it. But another one.
Oh, sorry. It's super interesting because that's we pro-gun advocates here. That's what we're trying to say. The police cannot be everywhere, and we do have a lot of military in the street, but they can't be everywhere every time. And we do have a lot of cases where an armed civilian has stopped the terrorists, because we don't really get mass shootings, but we do get obviously terror attacks. And everyone is responsible for their own protection and the protection of others.
100%.
I do want to ask you something, Kerry. Do you think there should be any criteria? What's the minimal criteria you think should be for owning a firearm?
Or a threshold, not a criteria, a threshold. A threshold.
Like a threshold, some kind. And also, do you think it matters what type of firearm, like a rifle versus a handgun or a pistol, or?
So I know where you're going. I know where you're going with this, and to reinforce the point that you want to make, and which is why having an American on is awesome for this. but I can speak to it not only as a woman who's a survivor of violence, of domestic violence, and an advocate, but also as a firearm instructor. So I'm a nationally certified firearm instructor, and I teach all over the country in the United States, and so I get a really good temperature of different gun laws in different states, and what those regulations look like versus what the gun control advocates are actually telling you, and and so on. And there's no proof that requiring an individual to go to training has actually reduced gun crime. It's because the bad guy, the people that are responsible with their guns are typically the people going and getting the training and doing it without some sort of regulation from the government. We've seen that in several states, including my own here in Georgia. I live in Georgia, very gun-friendly state. Arguably, this will make some of your American listeners angry when I tell them we're actually a little friendlier than Texas even. We just don't talk about it like Texas does. Our state actually actively recruits gun manufacturers and gun industry manufacturers to come to the state. We're pretty friendly here. And we have had studies here in Kennesaw, Georgia. This was in the 80s. There's a little city called Kennesaw. If you're history nerds, American history nerds at all, you'll know that was one of the biggest places that was a Civil War battle there. But the little town, it's a little suburb-ish, kind of, right outside of Atlanta. And in the 80s, they did an experiment where they required every resident to be in possession of at least one firearm. And they trained them and stuff. And crime went to zero. This social experiment literally showed that an armed society is a polite society. That being said, I know that one of the big arguments is that we need to require training, and there should be a threshold for minimum competencies and so on and so forth. What we found here in the United States, right, because we have now 29 states that do not require you to have a permit to conceal carry in the United States, or in that state, excuse me, in that state. And we just had a law introduced that was for national reciprocity, or meaning that if you live in a constitutional carry state or permitless carry state, you don't have to have a permit in another state. That's actually how it's written. It's not abolishing permits, unfortunately. A little bit of a misnomer. That being said, I would be able to carry my guns in Illinois without a permit, on the streets. So that's a huge change. Now, what we discovered—
That's what Trump signed right now. There's
no, it's a bill that's been introduced.
Okay.
We're waiting for the bill to be passed, but Trump has said that he will pass it.
Okay.
Trump is isn't as pro 2A as people think he is necessarily. So that's a whole different story. But here in Georgia, Texas is another state that more recently got rid of the concealed carry law requiring individuals to have a permit. And what we found consistently in every state that gets rid of the concealed carry permit requirement to conceal carry, the numbers of people going to get training actually increases. It doesn't decrease. So more people are going to get firearm training, concealed carry training, after the requirement or in my eyes, a barrier to conceal carrying. Because again, fundamentally, at the end of the day, the bad guys aren't following the laws anyway. You know, I recently was published in the Wall Street Journal about a little over a year ago. We had a Supreme Court case called the U.S. versus Rahimi. And Rahimi, let me tell you, as an American or anybody for that matter, this is not the guy we wanted representing us in a gun case at all. This dude was a horrible, horrible human being. Domestic abuser. I mean, just excuse my language, piece of shit. I mean, this guy was terrible. Look him up. Zaki Rahimi, dude was terrible. All of that being said, I actually defended him. And that took, you can imagine, that got a lot of attention as a domestic violence survivor. But interestingly enough, he was never actually convicted of domestic violence. His guns were taken away from him under a domestic violence restraining order. And the conviction that they were trying to get the rulings on, that, you know, went up the food chain to the Supreme Court, was the fact that he was convicted for being in possession of firearms while under the restraining order and the constitutionality of that. So the ruling ended up favoring the state, and that was in Texas, I believe. But the wording and the language of it was really convoluted, and essentially that was the case where Clarence Thomas took the opportunity to essentially tell legislators and the people, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but you should read the ruling. As a researcher, you'll like to read the ruling. But essentially, he's like, look, this is crap. And if you really want it overturned, this is what we need to see for you to overturn it, right? I mean, he was in not so many words, essentially telling us what the Supreme Court needs to have in front of them to be able to make these rulings. So, you know, we are blessed here in the United States that we have the Second Amendment. Our founding fathers understood it very well. Interestingly enough, contrary to a lot of belief, both domestically here in the United States and internationally, the Second Amendment was not, the philosophy of the Second Amendment was not born in the United States. It was actually born in England. And where, depending on the monarch of the time and the favor that he had with his people versus Parliament, would determine whether or not he required his subjects to be armed. So it's an interesting little history side to that. And for the people that want to argue about, well, the Second Amendment, you know, gun control supporters, it didn't mean this, and it, you know, militia means this, and well-regulated means this. There were 7 drafts to the Second Amendment when James Madison wrote it. They knew exactly what they were writing. And, you know, so we see all of these different interpretations, and we see that with these state laws as well. And there are states, I think there's 3 now. I believe there's 3, maybe 2, that do not require, you can go and get a permit and get fingerprinted and get a permit without having to have training. But interestingly enough, the people that are holding those permits, whether with training or not, are not the people that are committing the crimes. So it's almost as though those gun control laws really don't stop criminals from A, getting and obtaining guns, and B, using them in crimes. I mean, you know, you ask me, I take a lot of heat in the pro 2A circle, because I, as a domestic violence survivor, I'm a 100% absolutist. I believe violent felons, once they've successfully completed their sentences and they are released back into society, that they should have their rights restored. Because recidivism is high, but a lot of the reason recidivism is high is because the system itself is setting people up for failure. We don't need to keep these people from owning guns. We need to fix what we call in our country a corrections system. So when somebody has served their time in the United States and they are released, they are considered, for all intents and purposes, to be reformed by the state. If they are in fact reformed enough, especially to get their voting rights back, they should be able to have all of their rights back. And it isn't fair to those that are truly reformed, that want to protect themselves and their families, to not be able to have access to that self-defense tool because they're a prohibited person. A lot of those quote unquote violent crimes that these people were convicted felons of were drug crimes, or they were not major felonies, and certainly not felonies with firearms or other weapons. So it's frustrating to see that this is a regulation that's put in place when the same people that disagree with me are the same people that also will say that the gun control laws that are in place don't actually keep guns out of the hands of bad guys, because if the bad guy wants the gun, he's going to get it anyway.
So here, it's actually interesting because here, if you have so much as a restraining order against you, they will take away your gun.
That's
It
it.
doesn't have to
That's
go.
what
They do that here.
It
No,
doesn't have to
no,
get
you have
to
to
get
listen. You
through the
have to
whole
hear about
criminal.
my friend. You need to understand how different it is.
Just give me
So
a sec. I'll
frustrating.
ask the
You're
question.
talking about rehabilitation, and people will. Oh, I have a friend, a good friend. He's also a pro-gun activist. So someone filed an anonymous complaint against him that he's abusing his children.
Yeah.
Okay, it was anonymous. It wasn't his wife. It wasn't someone he knows, and they took his gun. He wasn't even convicted. There
Let me just
weren't any
clarify. Let me just
evidence, and
clarify
they
for a
took
second.
away his gun. That's madness.
Okay,
Maureen,
so they
let
do
me
that
just
here in the
clarify,
United-
Kerry. Let me just clarify for a second. So, the thing is, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Am I stuck? Yeah. So if you have so much as a restraining order, which is way easier than getting a conviction in the criminal courts, obviously, yeah, they can take your gun away, and they can, if you have an open case against you, they can prevent you from getting a firearm if you are a convicted felon, of course. We don't have any restrictions on voting, though. So yeah, it's very much restrictive, but
it's the same way here.
I just wanted to ask about concealed carry, because here what we are encouraged to conceal carry. Like if you are eligible for a weapon, they do tell you that prevents theft. It keeps you safe, especially as a
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm in civilian clothes, I always conceal my weapon. When I'm in uniform, it doesn't matter because I'm a target anyway, so I usually go for the comfort.
And just to point out, we are not allowed to have long arms in personal license. That we're like, I think, the only country that it's only pistols.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's not going to
So
be
let
a
me
rifle.
clarify something. We call those in the United States, we call what you're talking about, where your friend, the anonymous phone call, we call those red flag laws. I'm actually, that is something that I'm nationally and internationally known for speaking on. Those are my lane. Because in the United States, one of the only way, well, the only way that red flag laws were actually enacted at a federal level was through what we call the Violence Against Women's Act, or the VAWA. And that Violence Against Women Act, every so many years it comes up for refunding or whatever. But that was the act that allows states to remove firearms from a person under a restraining order. Now, most states individually will have their own laws, where if it's any violent crime that they're removed. But if you're a convicted felon, you federally, like, you can't own a gun. But here, what I'm saying is, so our state, our government wants, like, they don't want these people getting guns either, but they're still getting them. And I'm sure that's still happening in Israel too, right? I mean, the law being in place isn't stopping people from getting the guns. In fact,
bad guys are
right, exactly, because if they're bad guys, they're going to get their guns.
Yeah,
right?
Depends which people.
But the one advantage to the Bill of Rights, not only our Second Amendment, but our Fourth and Fifth Amendments as well, with due process and so on and so forth, is the federal government knows that the chances of getting a federal red flag law passed is going to be very, very hard to do. So what they do is they leverage what is our Ninth and 10th Amendments. And because they know that the 10th Amendment is, protects individual state rights that are not codified. And that one's going to be too hard to codify because of the Bill of Rights. They essentially fund states through education and outreach to pass red flag laws that allow for those guns to be taken away from people based on accusations, which is a violation of due process. The most recent one
so
to
like
do that
they use grassroots movements, that's what you're saying, and they're like creating inside the state. They use federal funds, but they create like
Correct.
movements in the state.
Correct.
And
but they also fund the state legislatures
wow.
to do education and outreach as well. And
Awesome.
the most recent one that got passed to fund this was called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. There were a couple of things in it. One of them they pulled completely because all hell broke loose, as we like to say here in the South, because they said that any schools that offered archery or shooting teams, like here in Georgia, we have a lot of shotgun, like skeet shooting teams or archery, competitive archery teams. If they, this was all Joe Biden. This was all a Joe Biden policy. Joe Biden and Kamala. I confronted her actually about red flag laws many years ago. That went exactly how you thought it would go with her deer in headlights look in her face. But very, so everybody freaked out about losing the schools would not get their Department of Education funding if they had these shooting and archery programs. So all hell broke loose over that. And they immediately rescinded it. But the one thing that went under the radar that people don't really realize is that the one thing that stayed in place was all of the millions and millions of dollars in funding provided to the states through the federal government. Right, the way that our government gets away with stuff, I'm sure yours does it too, right, is they pass these bills. In these bills, they'll say, we're going to create this committee, and this committee is going to be allocated $50 million to do blah, blah, blah. Well, what does that do? That takes the responsibility now off of the legislators, right? And puts it into the committee,
Exactly
so that when people are holding the legislators
going nowhere
responsible, they can claim plausible deniability. So, well, we created this committee. Well, the committee is saying, well, they passed it and give us the money to do it, right? And so that's how crap ends up in our courts that has no business being in our courts, because the legislators, the congressmen and women and the senators in the United States have figured out a way to manipulate the system through funding committees, because they understand and listen, because this is what's so important, because this cannot be just unique in the United States. Most people are not reading the proposed legislation that is put out for their governments to be voting on and passing. They listen to the rhetoric that's put out.
Exactly. It sounds good. Yeah.
It sounds good. And well, that's what threw me into this, was a law in Washington state that, had all of these things in it that sounded great for gun safety. But there was one little caveat that they didn't talk about in it. They didn't market it. They didn't advertise it. And that is when you try to buy a firearm in the state of Washington and you sign what we call our NICS background system, 4473 is the number of the document. For those of you that don't know this, and apparently a lot of people across the world don't, we have federal background checks for firearm purchases in the United States. Federally, like the FBI, it goes to the FBI system. So in Washington state, when you go to purchase a gun, when you sign that form to have that background check, it is a waiver of your, what we call our HIPAA rights here, HIPAA, I think it is. I don't think it's HIPPA. I think it's HIPAA. And essentially that allows the state to look at your medical record. Now, we all know they're not looking for a broken leg, right? They're looking for mental health issues. They want to
screen out the mentally ill.
Right. Obviously. So after my ex-husband almost killed me, I did what I was supposed to do. And I went to therapy. And I have those 4 magic letters, is what I like to call them, jokingly, on my medical record, PTSD. Yeah. That's what they're looking for, right? Because most of the time, PTSD are those types of mental, I don't like to call them disorders or illnesses or, but mental situations, are usually related to veterans. But we have studies here in the United States that show that the second largest demographic that suffers from PTSD are domestic abuse survivors. But we don't hear those conversations because they want to use domestic violence victims for gun control. Where children and domestic violence victims are the two biggest pawns for gun control in the United States. So in the state of Washington, you can be denied the purchase of a firearm based on what they see in your medical record. And we have an organization here, an amazing organization. I can connect y'all with them directly if you'd like, Maureen. And Nitzan, if you guys are interested, it's called Gun Owners of America. And they're a no compromise organization, much more progressive with the fight for gun rights than the NRA has been for decades now. And I was one of their plaintiffs to overturn that lawsuit in the state. And here's what's really sad about that. The circuit court, the original court that heard our case, essentially agreed, because we tried to hit it on the technicality, not the constitutionality of it, because that's really hard in a very far left state in the United States. Additionally, there was another gentleman who was fighting it out on the constitutionality, but there were some technicalities written into that, or there were technicalities with how that bill was presented. And we were trying to hit it on that, trying to get it overturned on that. And the circuit court judge agreed with our side and said, well, you're right about this, but I'm not going to put a ruling in because it's going to go to the appeals court anyway. So in other words, he was too afraid of putting his name on this piece of legislation. It was probably election time for him in a very liberal city. Tacoma, Pierce County, Tacoma.
We don't elect them and they're still afraid. We don't elect judges are appointed, and yet they're some of the biggest cowards you have ever met. If they can avoid making a decision, if they can avoid making a decision, they will.
It blows my mind. It blows my mind that the system is the same system. It's the same thing I experience every time.
Well, we kind of helped y'all create it.
The Israeli parliament now they create committees about they wanna put the social workers and social welfare in the gun licensing process to create a situation that you will prevent in the name of protecting women and children. BS.
That's because the United States government taught your government how to do it.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah,
right? I mean, let's just be honest about that.
I'm looking at it. I'm listening to you, and I'm like, I have so much to learn from her.
Yeah, well, and I'm happy to help you. Like I said, I'm even happy to come over there and speak on it. You know, I like I said, I've done it in other countries.
Even the Washington bill that you're talking about, this, if I use this as a case study when I go to my Knesset, to the parliament, it's you don't understand how helpful it is for me. The technicality that you're talking about.
Sure.
It's crazy.
That bill was called I-1639 in Washington State. Oh, there's worse ones than that. That just happens to be one of that's the one that directly threw me into gun rights. But there's
I have so much to look for.
Yeah, well, and I'm happy to help you with that. So
we also have the same issues regarding mental health. Like if you even have a very common condition like ADHD and you're on medication, on legal medication, sometimes they will deny your original request. You can fight it, but it's a whole lot of bureaucracy.
No, they won't deny. The doctor won't sign the waiver, the medical waiver. The doctor will tell you, I'm not signing that. And then you're stuck. It's not even that they denied it from you. It's just the doctor.
I have a friend that got denied
form.
But
sometimes the doctor say, I'm not going to sign it, and that's it.
Well, and the thing is that you can keep petitioning that doctor in those courts to get it. And eventually you'll get it, but you're going to have this whole record that they denied it first. And if God forbid you have to defend yourself, they're going to scrutinize that.
And it's expensive. And it's expensive. And you have to pay for legal counsel, and you have to all of that. So I'm
going to answer Nitzan?
Yeah.
That's
actually like the best. I'm used to being Nitzan in the States, so you're actually pronouncing it very well.
My husband spent an immense amount of time in the Middle East and understands. And Israel was one of his favorite countries that he ever visited, by the way. He loved it. He really did. He loved it. He goes, it was just cool. But so he's on me all the time, making sure that I'm trying to pronounce things properly. And it matters to me because I, not only as a woman who's usually my name is always misspelled constantly. People call me Kelly all the time. But you know, I want to make sure I'm getting it right. So to answer your question about concealed carry, and then I want to talk a little bit about the significance of why women are being weaponized the way they are for gun control. But concealed carry, you know, I think that there's a huge misconception about the United States and gun owners and gun carriers. The majority of us do not open carry our guns. We conceal carry these guns. I personally conceal carry. Now I live in a, like I said, not only do I live in a very gun friendly state, there's, as I'm sure you guys understand, right? There's the city, right? There's the urban areas, and there's like the suburbs, and then there's the country or rural, and then there's like the country out rural, and that's where I live. I live out where like in farmland. I've got a 30-acre homestead. So everybody are like, nobody's afraid of guns, even if like afraid of other people carrying guns here. Even if they're not gun people themselves, that stigma doesn't exist here. It's super fascinating. And I mean, whether they're carrying a pistol or they've got a rifle hanging in their truck, right? It's not a thing here. That fear, which is cool. And it's interesting for me to note that as I travel around the country and teach in different states, how the fear of guns is 100% politically based, cultural, in the cultural political side, as well as regionally, right? So here, when like obviously in the South, we have a whole block of areas in the South that are very conservative and more pro-gun. And I can go anywhere here in the South. And even if a woman doesn't carry a gun or she's like, oh, it ain't my thing, they're not afraid of them. Whereas when I go to the West Coast and teach, and I lived in Washington State for 20 years, that's where I was the plaintiff in that lawsuit. There's an inherent fear. And what's funny is they perceive a lot of that fear with open carrying. When most of us are not open carrying, you know, approximately over half of pistol owners, handgun owners in the United States are concealed carrying at any given time. And when they tell you that we have over 300 million guns estimated, I think that's probably a low estimate. That's based on the numbers that they have from like what has actually been purchased and not what's been, you know, everything else that's going on. And that, don't even get me started on the 3D printing side of this. That's completely changed, you know, the numbers on that, which for me, I think is great. I'm all for it. The less they can know, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a big fan of government in any form whatsoever. I'm definitely, when I was asked to join Ladies of Liberty, I'm like, I'm definitely your girl. And here's why. So the stigma of concealed carrying, or excuse me, open carrying is prevalent, yet most people are actually concealed carrying if they're going to be a gun owner. Like, you're not going to know. And for me, you're not going to know unless I need to use that gun, right? You're never going to know that I have that gun. Now, for fun but truth being told, the reason I don't poo-poo people for open carrying. Do I think that concealed carrying keeps people safer? I think that there's a couple of branches to that. First and foremost, what we do see with some people, not all, but we do have evidence to show that people that do open carry tend to let their guard down and their situational awareness weakens, because the subconscious, there's a subconscious false sense of security that thinks that, you know, oh, people see the gun, they're going to leave me alone. And so we actually have people on video, idiots, open carrying on video where somebody has taken their gun from them. Now, if you have a proper holster and right training, you know not to let that down. And open carrying really would be, it would be the deterrent, because you're not going to get your gun taken from you, right? So while that is a thing, it's a very small percentage with open carrying. Honestly, the reason why I don't want open carry, or why I don't open carry, I don't poo-poo somebody that wants to open carry. If they want to open carry, let them. That's their right, and they should have the right to do that. I don't open carry because I own really nice guns, many of them, and whichever one I choose to carry that day. I literally, like you're talking about guns and how I literally have them. Like, there's one here, there's one there. Like I don't have kids in my home. You know, I have dogs and cats and chickens. So, and my husband and I, so we have guns in every room out on tables. Right. And I live in the South. Ain't nobody coming to this house, because nobody breaks in out here in the country, because
they know.
Because they know
they
better.
know what to do. They know better than that.
That's illegal here, actually. You have to buy a safe with your gun, and you have to, if it's not on you, it has to be in the safe. Now, I do have small children, so it's either on me or in the safe anyway.
100%.
But also, like, when I was a kid and my dad had a rifle and not a big enough safe, today they make them, but we were just taught respect for
Yeah,
firearms, and my kids know
100%.
that too, because
Yeah.
it's always in the safe, but they know it's dangerous, and they
Yes,
know
exactly.
I have kids. Listen, I don't. By the way, I just need to let you know, I'm not allowed to carry a gun, to own a gun in Israel. I am. I have a license to supervise in the in shooting range. I did the course. I did practical shooting. I teach other people how to shoot better. I am in charge of the safety in the shooting range, but they do not. They don't allow me.
Bullshit.
That's bullshit. I know. I have kids. I have matches at home. I have detergents, things they can
Yeah.
reach, other things that are, trust me, my kids did lots of crazy stuff that
Yes.
has nothing to do with like
100%. So, I mean, I do get the safety thing of it, you know, like you, my grandfather was born and raised a Texan, West Texan, like old West, like what your perception of old cowboy West is, that was how my mother's side of the family are. And so as children, when we would go spend the night at grandpa's house, we had our own bedroom, but the unlocked gun safe was in the kids' room. But we were more afraid of grandpa than we were of the guns and what we would do if we touched those guns, right? Because he taught us, like you said, from a very early age, these things will hurt you. I think that, that what we've done with perpetuating the fear is feeding into the curiosity, which leads to a lot of what we call these negligent discharges or these cases of gun violence with children.
How old were you when you first shot your a gun?
I was, gosh, 6, maybe 7.
Wow.
6
My
or 7.
8-year-old wanted to do it, and I told her I will take you when you were 14. Like my dad took me when I was 14, even though it's harder now.
Yeah.
But
Well, I take 7. So I get people that ask me all the time in their classes and, you know, and things that they, you know, how old their children and, you know, and when they're under a certain age, usually 15, I want to ask a few questions of the parents or of the children. Let me interview the children themselves. And, you know, because I've had 8-year-olds in my class that are paying attention to me more than 50-year-old women in my classes, you know. So I will teach children as young as 7.
Amazing.
Interestingly enough, I had a woman, she was an immigrant. She was actually a Ukrainian immigrant to the United States who is ultra conservative. And I won't even get into her rants about Ukraine and how much she hated it, but that's a whole different story. But she came to my class with her 20-year-old daughter and her 2-year-old. And I went, oh crap, how are we going to deal with this? Right. Well, I had amazing assistant instructors and all of the other women in there. Women will tend to do this with each other. And you know that, right? We tend to take care of each other in these situations. We're like, well, we'll do what we can. I had protection, ear protection and eye protection for him. But I keep these little, we call them airsoft guns. They're little recreational guns. I don't know if you guys have
Airsoft. We have these these I'm allowed to shoot in Israel.
Okay, okay, Israel. So I have little handgun ones that I use to do demos in the class to show proper grip and racking slides and dropping magazines and stuff, just little plastic airsoft guns. And of course, you know, a little boy, it's almost like they know from birth, right? Girls know how to take care of the baby doll and boys know how to pick up a toy and make it a weapon or make car noises. It's almost as though there's differences between us, right? Between boys and girls. But
I personally was always into the weapons and never into the
they just
stuff.
do. And girls tend to go toward the dolls or whatever and whatever.
Well, maybe other girls, but not this one. Not this one. I was never. I was into swords from the get-go.
Well, good for her. Yeah, there are exceptions to the rule. So that being said, he picked up one of these, you know, airsoft guns. And of course, everybody kind of freaked out. And I said, no. And I got permission from mom, of course, first. And I said, is it okay if I teach him a couple of things? And she did. And remember, he was 2. In fact, I should repost that because that was such a cool story. And it's been a couple of years. He was 2 years old. And so I handed it to him and I said, this isn't something that you play with. I mean, you can play with this, excuse me, but understand you can't put your finger, and I showed him inside the trigger guard. Said you don't put your hand inside the trigger guard. You can keep your hand on the grip and don't point this end, the barrel end, at anybody in the class. So this is when we were in the classroom for 3.5 hours before we went out to the range. I want you to know that that was the only time I had to tell that 2-year-old that. He never pointed at anybody, never put his finger on the trigger, ever. Because the fear of guns is perpetuated by cultures and the parents. It has, what kids will only do what we teach them how to do. Which brings me to one of the most important parts that I hope your ladies understand. women, mothers, are one of the most powerful forces on the planet. We have literally been the rise and fall of empires for millennia. We have been oppressed by religions. We have been, oppressed and suppressed by politicians. And what a lot of women don't realize, particularly in the United States, on the left or our liberal side, or I don't even like to call it liberal because there's a lot of moderate, rational thinking liberals. I call it the leftists, right? The crazy,
Yeah, progressive.
yeah, the crazy wackadoo side of stuff, right? But since, and without going down the rabbit hole of women's history, which I've studied for close to 20 years, I've studied American women history and some of how that's related internationally and stuff as well. But particularly after they gave us the right to vote, interestingly enough, Democrats did not want to give us the right to vote. And it took a year once our right to vote was passed. It was another year before it was ratified because Democrats kept that from happening or wanted to keep it from happening. But they have weaponized women against their own best interests. Politicians have, because they know how powerful women are, especially when we collectively come together and we're pissed off. So if they have taken generations of perpetuating fear in women about guns, it's easier to organize them and like I said, weaponize them to support gun control, which is literally one of the most anti-feminist things that you can do, is taking away a woman's ability to defend herself with the most effective self-defense tool available to him. Gun rights are women's rights. All gun control is sexist and oppressive to women, period. But these politicians and these progressive leftists in the United States, or liberals, I believe this is what you guys would probably refer to them as, progressive liberals in your country, are the ones that, if you notice, they're the ones that have weaponized women. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is where my real feminism comes in, is that here in the United States, we see, right, because the pendulum can never come to the middle. Y'all know that, right? It's either here or it's here. And we're seeing it here in the United States. And with Trump being elected, we're seeing an emboldened sect of far right conservatism as well, right? Extremism, where there's a lot of misogyny and chauvinism and anti-Semitism.
Yeah,
we're seeing a lot of that coming up now, right? And it's all been emboldened by that far right. Now, again, these are the few.
yeah.
They certainly don't represent the majority, but what happens when they're loud and obnoxious? They get heard just like the other side.
The noisy few.
Exactly. And so what we're seeing here in the United States now is we're seeing that far right pushing this movement to oppress women's voices. And to the point where there's a movement, thank God it's small at this point, although I've slowly watched it gain momentum, wanting to take away women's right to vote. You wanted to take away my Second Amendment, try taking away my 19th Amendment, my right to vote, and you're going to see how quick you're going to find that Second Amendment become important to me. Because my 19th Amendment protects my Second Amendment in the United States. So I don't play with that. But they have tried, because this is the response of the far right to the far left, what we call them in the United States, feminazis.
Yeah, we call them like
that term, but they
call
them that here.
Also in Israel.
So it's derogatory.
Here,
I don't approve.
Here it translates really well because they take away guns from Jewish people who want to protect themselves. Yes. So they're literally feminazis.
Yeah, I think right, exactly.
I think it's a double-edged sword of a term, because it can be used against normal feminists too.
100%.
But final question. So how do we do it? How do we encourage more women to become, to take their safety into their own hands and to realize that actually owning weapons could be in their best interest?
And I'm just letting you know, as a representative of Armed Women of Israel, we have only 3% of the eligible people who are allowed to carry guns are women. And it's really hard for us to convince women to own guns and to come and train, and because of that fear, the manipulation. So we would love any advice or tip that you have.
Well, 3% of those that are allowed to actually own them, we call those rookie numbers, and we need to up those numbers first and foremost. And how we do that. So I don't know if y'all saw it. I know you watched it happening here, continuing to happen here. And I'm not sure what that looked like there. Forgive me, I didn't pay attention to it as much, but where we had the gender ideology stuff going on, and how like pushing men into women's bathrooms. And that wasn't even the big tipping point for a lot of women, and particularly mothers, as it was pushing this gender ideology in our public school systems. And what happened? The minute that they really started pushing this, and these parents actually became present in their children's education, which was the first mistake they made, is they let the state take over their education. That was the first thing they did. But once they started seeing these books that were in the libraries for these schools, these pornographic books essentially, and all this gender ideology in the schools and stuff, that's when all hell broke loose again. And the mothers were like, absolutely not. And you started seeing them collectively come together and push back. So I say it tongue in cheek, but there's truth to it, in that I have a dream that women will become educated enough, or at least wake up enough to understand how they're being used, to support gun control, which is in their best, against their best interest, right? On one side. Here's what's important that a lot of people don't see is on the other side of this, we have these conservative women that stay quiet. They don't get involved, right? Because that's too aggressive, and they don't want to be perceived as these women are not progressive, too aggressive. They don't want to be perceived.
The floral dresses,
right. But they
yeah.
don't want to be, right, the traditional wife crap. That's a whole thing now, whatever that's supposed to mean. But those conservative leaning women don't want to be perceived as these crazy women on this side. So they don't tend to get as loud and push back. What did it for them was this gender ideology crap and even though the men and women sports kind of a thing. So if I can get women to have that same energy for gun rights that they did for the gender ideology in schools and boys and girls sports and all of that, the gun control debate would be over. And here's how you do it. You cannot come in, and I do this, and I know this because this is test proven, because I literally do it as I live in my van at truck stops and travel around the country teaching women for free. Here's how you do it. We have this thing on the more conservative side, and I think that I would say it's fair to say that Israel sees this as well, is that logic over facts over feelings, facts over feelings. We need to give them facts and data. First and foremost, women are emotional thinkers, and that's not a bad thing. And it's tragic that we've come to a point in our world where having some sort of empathy is considered to make people unstable and unable to be logical. I think that that's ignorant in itself. That being said, one of our biggest powers is the fact that we have empathy as women, and that we can show that empathy. However, we have to communicate with women that way. We also live in a culture and a society now through social media and such, where everything is feelings over facts, right? We see this, right? We want legislation that's feeling over facts and all of this kind of stuff. So instead of fighting that, we have to start using emotion, but not being emotional, and planting those seeds. I get women in my classes constantly that are centered to the left side, progressive side, that aren't anti-gun, but they want gun control. Okay. And how I get them to flip, and I've developed a reputation actually for flipping women on gun control with this conversation, because what I've done is I've helped them understand how these laws that are put in place affect their ability to protect themselves, and more importantly, how to protect their babies, because women will martyr themselves for their babies. So you may not be able to get to them through self-defense for themselves directly, but the minute you bring up their babies, bets are off, right? The minute that we have to have the conversation about how we protect our babies. So when we can flip that proverbial emotional switch for women and help them understand how gun control laws specifically negatively impact women, from being able to defend themselves, now we've got something that we can work with, if that makes any sense. So, and it works. I know it works because I watch it work. And and then what we do is after you do that, you just take them out and you destigmatize the actual tool itself. When I put a rifle in women's hands versus a shotgun, because most women are told to get a shotgun, shotguns are actually not as easy to shoot as rifles are. And the minute I put it in their hand, I've developed and I've established that relationship with these ladies, this friendship with them that allows them to be willing to let me put that rifle in their hand where they may not have before, right? I've developed that trust. They come out, they shoot the rifle versus the shotgun, and they go, oh, and I went, why are they taking away one of the easiest tools for you to use to defend yourself and your families? It's because they're using you for a bigger agenda. And one of my girlfriends, who's an amazing competitive shooter, international competitive shooter, she said it best when she says they're going to keep killing our babies until they take our guns. And that applies to all of you there as well. We literally watched just happen.
One of the best sentences I use after October 7th, when I see women that even after October 7th, they kidnap babies, they burned babies alive, they shot them in the head, they mutilated them, and they still don't want the guns. And I'm like, I'm just saying, I'm not even arguing anymore. I'm just telling them, I would rather have a gun and not need it than need a gun and don't have it.
100%.
That sentence, I can see it sinking in when they think about it. Like, it's, but it's a great tip. It's actually, I'm more of a fact girl.
Yes.
But
you're still a woman and you understand that from that space, especially as a mother, right? Especially as a mother. And hell hath no fury, like a mama.
They shot. We have, I need to send you a video. We have our last training a week ago. We trained women. They held a doll of a baby, like that weighs like a baby, and shooting with one hand. And I sent it to a friend of ours. She's a member of the Knesset. She's pro guns and like us, and she almost cried when I sent the video, because a couple of months ago there was a mother on the light train in Tel Aviv with a baby in the carrier, and the terrorists got on the light train and they started shooting.
That just made my stomach knot. Oh my gosh.
She protected the baby.
Of course she did.
She died. She saved the baby. And like, I can use that. I usually don't do that. I usually go to the facts because, but I will start using that because there's because it's really hard.
I'll send you the 911 calls
maybe this will be the way.
Yeah, it is. That's how you get the women.
Specific terror attack. There was a meme going around showing a woman having a baby carrier on the front and a gun in her back and a holster in her belt. And this was a meme going around because this mother was killed with the baby and the baby carrier, and she didn't have a way to protect herself. And it was like a meme that did resonate and said, mothers should also get guns. If you know that, Maureen, maybe we can do something like that again. Okay, so thanks so much for joining us. We really have to conclude.
This was amazing.
If you want to have a final sentence each before we stop the recording, and then we can.
I want to move to Texas.
You don't want to move to Texas. Texas is ready to flip. People don't believe me, but I watch this stuff.
Really?
Yes, really? Texas, especially if you want to own a garden, you can be a rancher in Texas, but gardening isn't, like growing food isn't necessarily the climate there.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. They brag about their gun laws there, so everybody thinks they want to move to Texas, but all the Californians have moved there, and all of their major cities have flipped.
Okay.
So it's not what people think it is. I mean, it's still,
did not know that. Wasn't aware.
Don't get me wrong, they're still holding the line.
Okay, Georgia it is. Okay.
Well, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri. Missouri's a great state for guns. That's, in fact, probably even more than Georgia.
No, I have to save the Jewish people. I'm sorry, I'll stay here for a while.
We have a lot of Jewish people here because we're so Georgia, I know this is not the conversation you wanted to wrap this up, but we've got Georgia, because we're so old. This is a very, very old state. We have our history here, which is an hour and a half for me because I live close to Savannah where the port was. We have huge pieces of the Bonaventure Cemetery, which is one of the oldest cemeteries in America, with Jewish graves in it from the 1600s, 15 and 1600s. So this area is actually fairly large for Jewish settlement. Interestingly enough, a lot of people don't realize that about the South, but we have Baptist churches here and a synagogue in my little country town.
We might come visit you.
Come
And also,
visit me.
we'll be happy to have you
I'm
here.
gonna go to the NRA conference, so.
Oh, well, the NRA conference is 3 hours from me. So here's the deal. I have 30 acres, and when you're done there, coming up my property, we'll just go in the backyard and shoot. I'll turn y'all into rednecks.
Okay, cool. Any last thing that you want to tell us
Ladies, I do. Ladies, stop allowing politicians to use you to pass policy and legislation that is directly in opposition to your best interests. Gun rights are women's rights, and you have the inalienable human right gifted to you by God to defend yourself and your babies, and they are using you to take that right away. Stop being their pawns and take your power back and learn not only how to safely use a gun, but start becoming involved in fighting for the rights for you to be able to carry that gun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.